Welcome to Bookbound Audio, where every story is a doorway to worlds beyond our own. Today, we invite you to immerse yourself in our spine-chilling tale, The Possession of Blackwood Manor. Prepare to journey through haunted corridors, dark family secrets, and otherworldly mysteries as we unfurl a narrative steeped in history, sorrow, and the supernatural. So dim the lights, lean back, and let the eerie echoes of Blackwood Manor transport you to a realm where every shadow tells a story. Enjoy the story. I stepped off the creaking bus amidst a chill wind that swept the tarmac of the small New England town, its icy fingers brushing my skin as though to warn me of the dark secrets ahead. In my hand, I clutched a faded notebook filled with years of research and scribbled notes, a testament to my life as a history teacher and eternal seeker of truth. My heart beat a nervous tattoo as I walked along the gravel drive leading to Blackwood Manor, a name that had sparked countless whispered legends and hushed conversations over the years. This estate, once a paragon of genteel society, now loomed before me like a relic of a bygone era. Its broken windows and crumbling walls a stark reminder of what time and tragedy can do. Elliot Brooks, my closest friend and the man with a reputation for unraveling the mysteries that refused to die, was already waiting by the wrought-iron gate. His broad shoulders and determined gaze carved a figure of quiet authority against the backdrop of the decrepit mansion. I could see a tension in his eyes, a mix of anticipation and apprehension, as he studied the estate before us. I adjusted my worn leather jacket against the biting wind and walked to his side with measured steps, each footfall echoing on the gravel. "Looks like the house itself is mourning its glory days," Elliot remarked in a low, measured tone as we crossed the threshold of the manor's front yard. His voice, gravelly with years of late nights and unspeakable encounters, resonated with a gravity that matched the spectral aura of the place. I found myself nodding in silent agreement. There was an undeniable melancholy here, a palpable sorrow that clung to the peeling paint and overgrown ivy. Inside, the ancient manor greeted us with a silence that was both profound and unsettling. Dust motes danced in feeble streams of sunlight that pierced through gaps in the decaying ceiling. The vast hallway, lined with portraits of long-dead faces whose gazes seemed to follow our every move, exuded an air of ominous grandeur. I inhaled deeply, trying to absorb every detail, every hint of history that wove itself through these time-worn walls. I could almost hear the echoes of whispered conversations and ceremonial incantations carried on the stale air. Elliot led me deeper into the manor, his steps measured and confident despite the oppressive atmosphere. As we reached the grand parlor, its arched windows framing a bleak, overcast sky, I couldn't help but feel that the room itself was a living testament to untold stories. Faded tapestries hung forlornly on the walls, and a large, ornate chandelier, its crystals dulled by time, loomed overhead like a ghost from a forgotten epoch. Every artifact and piece of furniture was steeped in the history of a family that had once inhabited this estate, a family whose fate was shrouded in mystery and, as I was beginning to suspect, dark sorrow. Elliot paused by a massive stone fireplace, his hand grazing the worn surfaces as if trying to absorb the silent murmurs of the past. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing in contemplation. "There's a heaviness here, a sorrow that's more than just the weight of time and neglect." I stepped closer, feeling the chill emanate from the stones, and murmured my agreement. I had come to Blackwood Manor not solely to offer my assistance but also to quench a thirst for the truth that had driven me from my native land to this strange corner of America. Every step here was a step into the unknown, a journey woven with myths of witch trials, mass executions, and curses cast in vengeance. The building itself seemed to guard these grim secrets jealously, offering only fleeting glimpses through the distortions of decay and despair. While Elliot examined an ancient portrait of a somber lady in a faded silk gown, I wandered to a side corridor lined with dusty books. My fingers traced the spines of leather-bound volumes that contained accounts of local law and forbidden rituals. One book in particular, its cover embossed with arcane symbols, caught my attention. I pulled it gently from the shelf and flipped through its brittle, yellowing pages. The script spoke of witch trials held on these very grounds, of accusations of sorcery and devil worship echoing in fevered courtroom debates, and of lives unjustly taken in a frenzy of horror. As I absorbed these grim passages, Elliot joined me, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "This place isn't just haunted by memories, Miguel," he whispered, almost reverent. "It's haunted by grief and wrath that refuse to die with the innocents." His voice, steady yet weighted by the realization of the manor's past, sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, I felt the crucial intersection of scholarly inquiry and supernatural dread, two realms that had merged here to form a living, breathing tragedy. Together, we sought out the library, a cavernous chamber where the secrets of centuries lay in waiting. The heavy wooden doors creaked as we pushed them open, revealing rows upon rows of shelves that seemed to stretch into infinity. The scent of old parchment and leather was overpowering, and the low hum of the wind outside blended with an almost imperceptible murmur of voices that seemed to come from the very walls. I moved slowly among the ancient texts, carefully noting inscriptions and marginalia that hinted at a dark legacy. Elliot, ever the detective, made notations in his ever-present notebook, his keen eyes scanning for any detail that might expose a hidden truth. In a secluded alcove near a stained glass window, I discovered a collection of correspondence tucked away in an old chest. The letters were penned in spidery prose, their ink faded with age but still legible enough to recount the horror of those doomed days. They spoke of a coven, desperate rituals, and the bitter aftermath of a witch trial that had left a permanent scar on the local community. The words seemed to leap off the page, each sentence a lament for lives unfulfilled and a curse that had seeped deep into the very soil of Blackwood Manor. I could almost hear the screams and prayers of those long gone, the angry ringing of injustice that hung over every word. Elliot, having caught sight of my discovery from across the room, hurried over and peered at the fragile letters. His eyes widened as he read, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy with the unspoken weight of what we were beginning to comprehend. Here, in the quiet solitude of the manor's library, the horrors of history reached out to claim us. I felt an inexplicable connection to the anguished souls of the past, a profound sorrow that threatened to engulf my rational mind with its intensity. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the ancient glass panes and causing the manor to groan as if in pain. Elliot suggested we check the adjoining corridors to see if there were any further clues hidden in the recesses of the building. As we moved cautiously along a narrow hall dimly lit by a few sputtering candles left in their sconces, every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind felt laden with meaning. I was acutely aware of the dual nature of this place, a sanctuary of both knowledge and nightmares. The mansion was a palimpsest of tragedies, each layer of it being marked by the dark events that had transpired within its walls. At one juncture, we discovered a hidden study tucked behind a row of heavy drapes. In this secret chamber, the air was unnervingly still, and the scent of incense lingered faintly as if from a ritual long since abandoned. On a desk sat a collection of personal diaries that chronicled the life of a woman whose fate had been irrevocably tethered to the cursed estate. I carefully flipped through one of the diaries, each handwritten line a raw confession of desperation and fear. Her words painted a portrait of isolation, of being trapped in a relentless cycle of dread and foreboding. I couldn't help but feel that her spirit, too, might still be roaming these halls, yearning for absolution or release. Elliot and I exchanged a glance that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. We knew that every discovery we made here was a double-edged sword. Each new piece of evidence only deepened the mystery and the terror that clung stubbornly to the manor like a second skin. Yet, there was an undeniable allure in the dark pool of the unknown. I remember the countless nights spent poring over books and scrolls in my modest apartment back in Mexico City, where the line between myth and history was a delicate whisper. Now, standing here amid the disintegrating splendor of Blackwood Manor, those memories seem to crystallize into a singular purpose: to uncover the shrouded truth regardless of the personal cost. As twilight began to cast long shadows across the manor's interior, I found myself drawn once more to a narrow stairwell that led to the upper floors. There was something about the cramped, spiral staircase that resonated with the echoes of lost voices, an almost imperceptible murmur that suggested secret meetings and ghostly laments. With a deep breath to steady my nerves, I ascended the stairs, each step echoing with the weight of centuries. The air grew colder and the darkness more complete as I reached the landing, where a faded tapestry depicting a long-forgotten family crest hung slightly askew on the wall. I paused there, reflecting on the tapestry's intricate design and the sorrowful history it implied, a history marred by betrayal and bloodshed. At that moment, a sudden clatter echoed from a room down the corridor. My heart pounded fiercely as I exchanged a quick, determined look with Elliot, who was waiting near the doorway. We moved silently toward the source of the noise, a small, nearly abandoned sitting room that looked as if it had once been a place of lively conversation but was now merely the stage for spectral echoes. In the dim light of a single, flickering lamp, we discerned the faint outline of furniture covered in white sheets, ghostly remnants of happier times. The room felt charged with an inexplicable energy, almost as if it were bracing itself for a violent reminder of its past. Within this quiet confinement, as Elliot methodically inspected the room for further clues, I experienced a surge of emotions that were difficult to articulate. There was fear, undeniably, but also a profound compassion for the souls that seemed to inhabit these spaces, souls whose tragic histories were etched into every crevice, every whispered sound. I moved slowly from one corner to the next, my hands brushing against surfaces that held the residue of a lot more than dust. They held memories, grief, and an almost tangible sense of regret. I closed my eyes for a moment, attuning myself to the melancholic cadence of the mansion, and in that silence, I felt the pull of the past like a forlorn melody. Elliot's steady voice broke the reverie. "Miguel, look at this," he said, beckoning me over to a small table near the window. There, scattered among old photographs and dried petals, lay a delicate silver locket. Its surface was intricately engraved with symbols I immediately recognized from the ancient book I had inspected earlier. I picked it up gently, feeling the cool metal against my skin, and studied its design with a mixture of academic curiosity and deep personal trepidation. The locket was sealed with a faint scratch across its clasp, suggesting it had been forcibly opened in a moment of desperate urgency. In that small object, I sensed a vital piece of the manor's harrowing puzzle, a token linking a forgotten tragedy to the malevolent energy that pervaded Blackwood Manor. Returning with the locket to the library later that evening, Elliot and I sat side by side at a long, creaking oak table beneath the dim glow of a solitary lamp. We spent hours poring over every detail, cross-referencing the locket symbols with the passages in the yellow diary and the cryptic texts housed in the ancient volumes. I took meticulous notes in my notebook, my pen scratching out the revelations as though trying to capture the unstable spirit of the manor itself. Elliot's insights, born from his deep experience with cases where the supernatural brushed too closely with reality, resonated with each discovery. Together, in the subdued light of the study, we began to form a picture, one that was fragmented and elusive, yet disturbingly cohesive. Time, however, seemed to lose its meaning as the night wore on. Shadows lengthened and merged, and every minute brought with it new clues that deepened the labyrinth of Blackwood Manor's past. I remember distinctly the moment when the wind outside shifted, its mournful wail a counterpoint to the quiet intensity of our work. For a fleeting instant, it felt as though the very walls were trying to speak to us, to share the untold stories of suffering and betrayal. My hand trembled slightly on the page as I documented the details, aware that every word had the potential to unlock yet another door into the darkness. As midnight approached, a profound stillness enveloped the manor, a silence so complete that even the sound of our breath seemed intrusive. I could almost sense the invisible presence of those who had suffered here, their anguish lingering in the cold night air. Elliot, typically unflinching in the face of such spectral manifestations, shared a long look with me, a silent acknowledgement of the peril we had unearthed. In that moment, I understood that our quest for truth was as perilous as it was necessary, and that Blackwood Manor was a battleground where the tragic remnants of history and supernatural forces waged an eternal war. I gathered my notes and prepared to leave the study for a brief respite, but the journey through the manor forced me to pause more than once. Every corridor whispered secrets in a language older than time, and every crevice seemed to hide a ghostly figure waiting for the right moment to emerge. As I retraced my steps to join Elliot in the grand entry hall one final time that night, I felt a solemn commitment settling over me, a promise to honor the dead voices of this place by unearthing the truth in every hidden corner, however painful or dangerous the path might be. Standing outside under the star-scarred sky, the cold wind mingling with the quiet hum of distant history, I took one last look at Blackwood Manor. Its silhouette loomed large against the darkness, a silent sentinel of sorrow and secrets. I realized then that our investigation was only beginning, and that within those walls lay the answers we so desperately sought. My heart was heavy yet resolute, echoing the silent determination of all those souls whose tales had been lost in time. Each moment here was etched indelibly into my memory, a foretaste of the revelations that the coming days would undoubtedly bring. I could still feel the lingering chill of the manor's corridors even as I stepped away, a constant reminder that the past was never truly behind us. Every step taken inside that cursed estate had tethered us more firmly to its tragic legacy. And as I followed Elliot back to the modest guest quarters provided for our research, I vowed silently that I would leave no stone unturned. The duty to honor the memories of those long-silenced voices outweighed any fear, and in that dangerous intersection of historical injustice and paranormal terror, I found the courage to carry on. The night drew on, and in the soft glow of a solitary lamp in the guest room, I continued to chronicle every detail of our findings. Each line I wrote became a testament to the inexorable pull of Blackwood Manor, a pull that promised to blur the boundaries between history and the supernatural. In that solitude, while the manor moaned in the distance and the ghosts of the past roamed freely, I felt deeply the gravity of our shared fate. The investigation had taken root in our lives, binding us to something far larger than mere mortal curiosity. It was a calling, drenched in sorrow and lit by the flickering light of forgotten hope. In the quiet hours before dawn, as sleep evaded me on a rickety cot in that lonely guest room, I lay awake with thoughts of the locket, the diaries, and the spectral presences that haunted every hall. My mind wandered to the painful stories contained within those fragile pages and to the lives that had been irrevocably altered by a curse that refused to die. It was in these moments, wrapped in the solitude of antiquity and the relentless whisper of the manor, that I understood the true cost of history and the price of unearthing hidden truths. Every sigh of the wind, every creak in the floor, carried the weight of lives lost and stories left unfinished. There, in that fragile intersection of night and memory, I felt my spirit merge with the endless tide of centuries. Blackwood Manor had claimed another devotee, another witness to the dark tapestry of human cruelty and supernatural despair. And as the first faint light of dawn began to seep through the tattered curtains, I resolved that no matter how much horror lay ahead, I would document every truth until the manor itself was no longer shrouded in mystery. The journey continued, and with the break of new light, so did our pursuit of answers within these cursed walls. In that moment, as Elliot and I prepared to step once more into the living relic of a tragic past, I felt that the manor was no longer merely an edifice of stone and sorrow. It was a living chronicle of grief, determination, and the undying quest for redemption. Morning broke in a shroud of melancholic light that seeped through the cracked windows of Blackwood Manor. I awoke to the soft, persistent whispers of the old building, a susurration that felt like distant echoes of forgotten voices. The fragile dawn light poured across the faded wallpaper and scuffed hardwood floors, casting long, spectral shadows that danced slowly in the quiet halls. I stretched in the guest room, my thoughts still entangled with the weight of the previous night's discoveries. The locket, the diaries, those desperate writings, they haunted my mind like unfinished verses of a tragic ballad. I can recall the moment I emerged into the corridor, the chill of the early morning air mingling with the stale scent of old paper and dust. Elliot had already risen, pacing silently through the dim, cavernous entry hall as if retracing the steps of a ritual already begun. His solemn expression betrayed a rare vulnerability, and I sensed that he too was wrestling with the manifold specters of the manor's past. He greeted me with a curt nod, and I joined him as we proceeded into the wider stretches of the decrepit estate. Our first destination was the bleak conservatory, a glass structure, now fractured and almost completely overtaken by tangled vines, which had once served as the manor's pride. I remember how the early sunlight refracted through shards of broken glass, casting prismatic patterns on the vine-laced floor. It was in this forsaken greenhouse that the air felt heavy with a pungent mixture of decay and the faint, elusive fragrance of long-dead blooms. I could almost imagine the once vibrant garden teeming with life and color, now reduced to a wild, unkempt wilderness. Elliot led the way with a steady hand on his notepad, marking inexplicable patterns on the floor, scratches that crisscrossed the wooden panels, as if created by frantic movements in the quiet of the night. He murmured softly about the possibility of concealed passageways and hidden chambers, details that might tie directly to the ritualistic practices hinted at in the diaries. I followed his lead, my own gaze absorbing every nuance, the way a tendril of ivy curled over a broken planter, the dewy condensation that clung stubbornly to the remnants of stained glass, and the creaking sound of the ancient structure settling into its inevitable decay. We paused in a corner of the conservatory where an old stone fountain had collapsed into ruin, its once ornate carvings marred by time. There, in the glistening puddle of water mixed with mud, we noticed an odd arrangement of stones that seemed deliberately placed rather than the chaotic result of nature's random decay. Elliot knelt and carefully brushed away the debris. I knelt alongside him, feeling the cold, damp earth seep into my fingers as he revealed what appeared to be a faded inscription. The archaic symbols brought a shiver to my spine. They resonated with the motifs I had seen in the diary and the locket, each symbol whispering of pain, sacrifice, and revenge. The inscription's message eluded immediate interpretation, yet its covert significance was undeniable. With the inscription delicately noted in Elliot's notebook, we made our way back inside. The manor presented a labyrinthine network of corridors and rooms, each with its distinct character and aura. One corridor, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed heavy with accusation, led us towards a large, doorless chamber that once functioned as the manor's music room. Dust-draped instruments lay scattered in disarray, their strings silent and their keys frozen in time. I slowly moved among them, imagining a night when the room had been alive with the strains of violins, pianos, and the haunting melody of a lone singer. The silence now was deafening, a void that underscored how rapidly joy could transform to despair when secrets festered beneath the surface. Elliot's keen senses suddenly alerted him to something unusual, a soft, almost imperceptible humming that resonated in the room like a lullaby of the damned. Together, we paused and listened intently. That hum carried the timbre of sorrow and longing. I could almost feel its rhythm pulsating within my chest, as if it were intertwining with my heartbeat. He suggested that the sound might be more than a mere echo of the past. It might be a remnant of a ritual left incomplete, or perhaps a spectral manifestation of grief striving to tell its own story. Captivated, we searched for its source. I followed down a narrow gap behind a grand, dusty piano until I found an old, leather-bound journal tucked away in a crevice. The journal's cover was cracked, its pages yellowed, and the words scrawled inside spoke of forbidden gatherings under the pale light of the moon, a cryptic record of those who once assembled in secret within these very walls. I hardly dared to breathe as I turned each page, the script trembling under the weight of malevolent sorrow. As the day grew older, we retreated to the manor's upper levels, driven by both our mounting curiosity and the palpable sense that answers were hidden behind each sealed door. Up the winding staircase we climbed, every step echoing in the vast emptiness. The ascent felt interminable, with the dim light of the morning fading into the low, eerie glow of afternoon. I could feel a presence, a spectral witness that accompanied us in silence, gazing from every corner of the hallway. The walls seemed to hum with latent energy, as if the manor itself was alive and perpetually on the edge of revealing its grim secrets. In one of the somber halls, we encountered a small study, its door slightly ajar as if inviting discovery. Stepping into the room, we were ensnared by the musky aroma of old parchment and the lingering trace of incense. A solitary candle burned on a desk cluttered with scattered papers, maps, and sketches of occult symbols. I was drawn to a large map pinned to one wall, its surface detailed with notations in a hurried scrawl. The map depicted the sprawling grounds of the manor and its surrounding forest, a maze of trees and hidden clearings which, according to the annotations, concealed sites of old rituals and clandestine ceremonies. Elliot's finger traced one of the marked circles thoughtfully, and I watched his face harden as he considered the implications. Without breaking the silence, Elliot suggested that we inspect the external perimeter of the manor. The idea that the true heart of the manor's cursed energy might lie outside, as wild nature and human intervention intersected, resonated with both of us. With cautious determination, we descended the narrow stairs that led to the back of the building, where an overgrown garden sprawled in unchecked disarray. The garden, a tangled wilderness of thorny brambles and vine-choked statues, was fraught with the vestiges of a home that once prided itself on opulence. I could hardly believe that such a place had witnessed the splendor of life and now stood as a silent crypt of lingering horrors. Outside, the garden was punctuated by the ruins of a once beautiful gazebo, its marble columns still partially intact but now marred by moss and creeping ivy. The air was thick with humidity and the organic scent of decomposing leaves, a stark reminder of nature's inevitable reclaiming of man's creations. Elliot knelt by an overthrown stone bench and began to scrutinize a series of faded carvings embedded into the stone. These carvings depicted figures cloaked in robes, their hands raised in supplication, and symbols that matched those I had seen repeatedly in the manor's interior relics. I joined him, my mind racing with possibility as I suspected that these carvings were not mere decoration but records of ancient rites performed in sacrifice to appease wrathful spirits or to seal away something unspeakably evil. We examined the carvings under the weak afternoon sunlight, which threw dramatic shadows across their ancient lines. Every notch, every groove, told a story of desperation and a need to bind a power beyond mortal control. I could feel the press of history in that moment, a force that surged beneath the surface of the present, merging seamlessly with the darkness of human transgression. Elliot's voice, low and almost reverent, broke the silence as he made careful notes about the symbols, hypothesizing their connection to both a local cult and the bitter legacy of the witch trials that had scarred these lands long ago. At length, our exploration of the external garden led us to a small clearing at the far edge of the property. Overgrown and barely maintained, the clearing bore the marks of a long-forgotten gathering. In its center lay a rough-hewn stone altar, its surface blackened by centuries of weathering and what I suspected to be the remnants of sacrificial fires. The stark contrast between the smooth cold stone and the wild, unruly growth encircling it gave the scene a primal, almost ritualistic beauty. I circled the altar slowly, my eye scanning every detail, the position of the stone, the faint outlines of burned offerings, and the dark stains that clung stubbornly to its surface. Elliot joined me as we both took in the grim tableau before us. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming mixture of awe and dread. The altar was not merely an object or a relic, it was a silent testimony to the collective anguish and defiance of those who had once sought to channel forces far beyond human understanding. I could almost hear the echoes of their incantations, faint chants borne on the wind, as if the very ground beneath our feet resonated with the memory of their desperate prayers. Elliot's presence beside me was a steady reminder that, together, we were on the cusp of uncovering a truth that spanned generations, a truth that, for all its horror, demanded to be set free. We lingered there in quiet contemplation for what felt like an eternity, absorbing the raw, unyielding energy of the clearing. The wind swirled around us, stirring leaves and carrying with it a subtle lament that seemed to come from the very earth. My heart pounded steadily as I recorded the details in my mind and on the pages of my notebook, each stroke of the pen an act of both discovery and remembrance. Our return to the manor was marked by a heavy silence that spoke volumes of the revelations that nature had just unveiled. The interior corridors now seemed more foreboding, as if privy to the secrets we had just uncovered, the spectral presence in every crevice growing more tangible. Inside, the air was cooler and laden with a palpable energy, a sense of expectancy hanging in every shadow. Elliot and I resumed our cautious exploration of the manor's upper floors, stopping occasionally to examine curiosities that had now taken on an even greater significance. One such stop occurred at the end of a narrow corridor leading to a small, unassuming door. I pushed the door open slowly and found myself standing in what appeared to be a child's nursery. Here, delicate remnants of a long-forgotten past were scattered, a broken rocking chair, a dusty crib draped with a lacy canopy, faded toys that lay abandoned on the floor, and a mobile that tinkled softly in the gentle current of air. The tender nostalgia of the room was overwhelmed by a disquieting presence, for the innocence of the nursery was tinged with a sense of foreboding that defied explanation. I could almost see the outlines of tiny footprints fading on the floor, traces of laughter that had once filled the space with joy, now replaced by a mournful emptiness. While I absorbed the haunting scene, Elliot examined a series of small, hand-drawn sketches affixed to the wall, crayon drawings depicting shadowy figures, a sun that never fully rose, and ominous symbols similar to those I had found elsewhere in the building. The juxtaposition of childhood innocence with the dark imagery instilled in me an undeniable sorrow. It was as if the house itself had tried, and tragically failed, to reconcile the harshness of its history with the sweetness of lost childhoods. I lingered a bit longer, feeling the inexplicable sorrow that clung to every disjointed image, and gently closed the door, leaving the nursery behind with a heavy heart. Later that afternoon, as we reassembled in the manor's vast central hall, Elliot and I sat at an aged mahogany table set against a backdrop of a large, cracked mirror that reflected our tired, grim faces. Against the backdrop of the mansion's layered silence, our voices merged in hushed conversation. Elliot recounted our discoveries with a measured cadence, and I interjected my own observations, each detail lending weight to the shared conviction that Blackwood Manor was a testament to tragedies that spanned centuries. We pored over our accumulating notes, correlating the scattered clues with the spectral apparitions and inscriptions that continued to confound us. The atmosphere in the hall was heavy with unspoken questions, the dim light of a single chandelier throwing jittery, dancing shadows that played across the surface of our accumulated evidence. I found myself tracing the lines of my own scribbles with both trepidation and determination, aware that each symbol, each broken piece of artifact, was a fragment of an immense puzzle that bridged our present investigation with ancient, unresolved torment. Elliot's determination was unwavering despite the growing chill that permeated the manor, the belief that somewhere among these disjointed relics lay an answer, a key to the curse that haunted the estate. In a quiet moment, my eyes wandered back to the mirror on the wall. The distorted reflection seemed to merge my features with the haunting faces of those who had suffered here. It was a reminder that the boundaries between then and now were more porous than one might presume. I could sense in that soft, wavering reflection the palpable sorrow of a lineage that had been robbed of peace by relentless injustice. With each passing second, the air grew thicker, fraught with an almost tangible energy that compelled us to press on with our inquiry. As dusk began its slow descent, the manor was once again bathed in a silver-blue twilight that accentuated every crack and every ripple in its worn surfaces. Elliot conferred with a quiet urgency, carefully noting the changes in the ambient energy as night edged closer. Together, we strolled through the corridors where the interplay of light and shadow bore witness to the manor's secrets. Every step was punctuated by a sense of both dread and excitement, the anticipation of uncovering deeper truths lurking in the gloom. I found myself inexplicably drawn to a small alcove near a wall where ivy crept steadily indoors. There, half hidden beneath peeling layers of old wallpaper, was a narrow niche containing a small statue. The statue, carved out of worn limestone and depicting a woman with outstretched arms, possessed a striking intensity in its sorrowful gaze. I knelt to study it closely, the details of its sculpted features softened by the passage of time yet imbued with a sorrow that transcended eras. In that silent communion with stone, I felt the weight of lives unjustly crushed under the relentless march of history, a quiet, desperate plea for remembrance and justice. For several moments, we remained in that space, allowing the silence to envelop us like a comforting shroud. The only sounds were the soft rustle of leaves brushing against the stone floor and the distant echo of our own breathing in the vast emptiness of the manor. Every now and then, I glanced at Elliot, reminded that I was not alone in this descent into the haunted past, that his steady presence was both a sanctuary and a fellow seeker in this intricate tapestry of torment and mystery. As twilight eventually surrendered to the deep shadows of early night, we retreated once again to the central hall. There, I lit another candle and resumed transcribing the day's events into my notebook. Each word captured a sliver of the overwhelming, multifaceted aura of Blackwood Manor, an aura heavy with spectral sorrow and the relentless echoes of voices that refused to vanish. Hovering over my pale, unsteady handwriting, I was keenly aware that nothing in this cursed estate was accidental, that every discovered artifact and every whispered sound were threads interwoven into the narrative of its dire past. Outside, a sudden gust of wind rattled the ancient window panes and seemed to carry a chorus of mournful voices from the darkened corners of the surrounding forest. I paused in my recordings, pen hovering as I listened intently to the haunting symphony of nature and unseen presences. The voices were not loud, rather, they rose and fell like a soft chant that spoke of loss and the ceaseless cycle of sorrow, a lullaby for the broken, echoing painfully in the confines of a long-forgotten realm. Elliot's soft voice broke my reverie. "We should reconvene in the main hall for one final review before night fully claims the estate," he said, his tone resolute yet laden with the gravity of all we had encountered. I closed my notebook with deliberate care, my hand still trembling from the intensity of the day's revelations. With the last light of dusk fading into a deep, oppressive darkness, we gathered our scattered notes and artifacts, our eyes reflecting a shared determination to not let Blackwood Manor's history crumble into oblivion. In that moment, standing shoulder to shoulder in the flickering pale glow of our meager lanterns, we silently vowed to carry on, to speak the truths that these haunted corridors demanded we honor. The corridors, now almost entirely submerged in shadow, seemed to pulse with a quiet promise of further revelations, of secrets concealed in the architectural folds of time, of memories locked behind the veneer of decay. With each careful step taken back to the central hall, I felt an intensifying bond with the suffering souls whose stories had seeped into every crevice of the manor. My heart was heavy, my mind racing with the layered realities we had encountered throughout the day, a confluence of tangible relics and intangible, spectral echoes that rendered history both brutal and deeply, ineffably human. That night, as we finally settled in the main hall beneath the uncertain canopy of twilight and candlelight, the manor seemed to breathe around us. Every creak, every shifting shadow, testified to the relentless pulse of bygone epochs. The steady hum of the wind outside mingled with our whispered discussions about the day's discoveries, a reminder that Blackwood Manor was a living chronicle of torment and longing. I found solace in the soft cadence of Eliot's measured explanations and felt buoyed by the assurance that our shared journey was as much a quest for truth as it was an homage to the lost voices calling out from the past. In those final, fragile moments before sleep beckoned, I sat back against an old sofa with my notebook resting on my knee. The candlelight flickered over faded inscriptions and scattered evidence, illuminating details that promised to captivate our next steps. It was in that quiet interlude, with the soft murmur of the manor's nocturne all around, that I pledged to myself, with every fiber of my being, to never cease in unearthing the buried, anguished truths of this cursed estate. Thus, in the deepening night of Blackwood Manor, amidst its spectral embraces and haunting echoes, our investigation pressed on with the tender urgency of lives intertwined with history. And as I recorded the last trembling notes of the day, my thoughts lingered on the fragile hope that the cacophony of sorrow and the whispers of past grievances would soon yield even deeper, unforgiving revelations that would illuminate the manor's tragic legacy. The oppressive silence of Blackwood Manor seemed to thicken the longer the night endured. As I sat in the main hall with Eliot, trying to steady my racing thoughts and collect my scattered notes, the manor's dark heartbeat pulsed around us in a rhythm both ominous and relentless. The low hum of unseen forces and the distant, intermittent creaks of wood against stone beckoned us deeper into the labyrinth of secrets hidden within these walls. I felt that every footstep we took resonated with the voices of those long silenced, an endless litany of sorrow that haunted every corridor and chamber. At that moment, a faint sound, a murmur barely louder than a whisper, drew my attention to a shadowed corner of the hall. Eliot had already sensed it too, his eyes flickered in acknowledgement as we exchanged a wordless glance. Our shared determination, tempered with a cautious dread, propelled us forward. Together, we approached a door partially concealed by heavy draperies, a door that I had not noticed in our previous wanderings. Its ancient wood was marred by deep gouges and the scars of a long-forgotten struggle. With trembling hands, Eliot eased the door open, revealing a narrow passage that led into a secret chamber not charted in any of the manor's well-worn maps, a hidden nook that seemed to breathe an air of untold despair. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, its only illumination provided by a feeble shaft of moonlight spilling through a fractured window high up on the wall. As I stepped inside, the air turned damper, laden with an inexplicable mix of cold and decay, and an almost palpable sorrow. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light, offering fleeting glimpses of scattered relics, a small table covered in faded lace, a shattered mirror with ornate carvings along its frame, and an assortment of fragile porcelain figurines, arranged in a haphazard display that suggested abandonment in haste. Every object exuded a sense of tragic loss, here and there, the weight of lives burned out echoed in the quiet corners of the room. I moved slowly along the creaking wooden floor, each step punctuated by the soft sound of dry wood and the ghostly whispers that seemed to ripple through the still air. The atmosphere was thick with the residue of lost memories, and I could almost sense past inhabitants watching from the shadows with sorrowful, unseeing eyes. Elliot, ever the pragmatist, began to inspect the room methodically, his practiced gaze scanning every detail for clues. I lingered near the shattered mirror, drawn inexplicably to it, as if it were a portal to the generations of anguish that had soaked into its very glass. In the mirror's fractured reflection, I glimpsed not just my own worried face but vague impressions of another, a woman with eyes full of grief and hands outstretched in silent entreaty. For a moment, I was utterly convinced that I saw her vanish behind me, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of loss and forewarning. The intensity of the moment forced me to take a deep breath, and as I steadied myself, an almost imperceptible plea filled the room, a voice that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was soft, as if from a great distance, yet laden with anguish and urgency. I felt compelled to follow that sound, to trace it back to its source. Elliot interposed softly, "We must be cautious, Miguel. There's more to these walls than mere echoes of the past." His tone was calm, but there was an undeniable edge of tension that rippled through his words. I nodded silently, feeling as though I were on the verge of unraveling a truth too terrible to comprehend. Leaving the hidden chamber behind us, we retraced our steps into the main hall where the dance of light and shadow had grown ever more sinister. The stale corridors now appeared to stretch into an endless twilight, and every crevice seemed to hide a secret. We continued our investigation with quiet determination, moving slowly as if not to disturb the delicate balance between the living and the dead that permeated this cursed estate. The heavy draperies shrouding the corridors swayed with the erratic breath of a capricious wind, and I could almost hear murmurs of old prayers mingling with the rustle of fabric. At one particularly narrow passage near the center of the manor, a series of faint, rhythmic footsteps echoed as if someone were pacing with deliberate intent. Our ears strained to capture the sounds, and I found myself gripping my pen tightly, my pulse quickening with every measured beat of that phantom cadence. Elliot motioned for silence, and together we crept forward. The sound seemed to come from behind a partially ajar door leading to a long-forgotten study that once belonged to one of the manor's original inhabitants. Its door, battered and worn, looked as if it had been left unlocked deliberately. Our combined sense of unease grew with every step, and as we crossed the threshold, a chilling draft swept past us, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of burnt wood and incense, a scent that triggered visions of secret ceremonies and desperate supplications. Inside, the study was a palimpsest of faded ambition and shattered hope. The walls were lined with shelves that still cradled dusty tomes and brittle manuscripts, each a repository for memories of ambitious men and women who had perhaps delved too deep into forbidden knowledge. A large desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with faded letters, half-burned candles, and scattered sketches of cryptic symbols. I felt an instinctual pull toward the desk, as if it were calling out to me with the resonance of countless unspoken truths. I gently lifted one of the yellowed letters from the pile. The ink, though faded, was elegant enough to hint at a bygone era saturated with both sophistication and foreboding. Its content spoke of secret meetings, hidden rites, and a pact forged in an age when fear and superstition wielded absolute power. I could almost taste the bitter sorrow and regret that seeped from its ancient paper. Elliot joined me, his presence a steadfast anchor amid the swirling uncertainty. "This letter," he said softly, holding up the fragile page delicately between his fingers, "it speaks of a ritual, one meant to bind a force beyond human reckoning." He traced the words with a reverence that bordered on awe. I watched his face as emotions flickered across his features, a complex blend of determination, sorrow, and a grim understanding of the darkness we were now entangled with. His voice, steady yet resonant with the gravity of his convictions, pulled me from my reverie. I carefully documented every detail in my notebook, my pen scratching feverishly as I captured the handwritten script and the cryptic annotations scrawled in the margins. As we absorbed the melancholic wisdom of that letter, a sudden, inexplicable clamor erupted from somewhere deep within the manor, a cacophony of sounds that shattered our temporary respite of scholarly inquiry. It was as if the very fabric of the building had ruptured, releasing a torrent of voices crying out in unison, each note drenched with despair and fury. The sound reverberated through the corridors, growing louder and more insistent until it felt as though the manor itself were alive with a seething, angry spirit. Elliot and I exchanged a brief, tense glance before hastily gathering the documents we had examined. With the letter securely stowed in his notebook and a renewed urgency in our steps, we left the study, our pace quickening as we ventured back into the dark corridors. The oppressive chorus of spectral voices, now more distinct and tormented, guided us deeper into the heart of Blackwood Manor. Every creak, every echo, seemed imbued with an unsettled energy that propelled us onward, forcing us to confront the living embodiment of the manor's tragic legacy. The corridor we followed was lined with faded portraits whose eyes, though depicted in oil and canvas, took on a startling clarity in the dim light. I could swear that in the flickering shadows, some of those painted faces shifted ever so slightly, their expressions contorting with unspoken anguish. As we passed, I nearly caught a whisper, a voice so faint it could have been the rustle of leaves, that sent a shiver racing along my spine. I felt the uncanny awareness that these figures were not merely remnants of the past but active participants in the ongoing torment of this accursed place. It was then that we encountered something utterly unexpected. At the far end of the corridor, barely illuminated by a sliver of moonlight that filtered through a high, narrow window, stood a door unlike any we had seen before. It was smaller, almost unassuming, with intricate carvings that depicted archaic symbols and figures entwined in a macabre dance. My heart pounded as I reached out and traced the embossed designs with a cautious fingertip. The carvings seemed to pulse beneath my touch, sending a current of chilling energy through my veins, as if they were guarding a secret too dreadful to be revealed without consequence. Elliot's steady voice came from behind me. "There's something here, Miguel, a presence that feels both ancient and malevolent." His tone was low, resonating with the iron resolve of a man who had faced darkness before and emerged battered yet unyielding. We exchanged no further words as we carefully opened the small door. It yielded with a hesitant groan, and we stepped into a narrow, circular chamber that immediately struck us with its profound sense of confinement and foreboding. The chamber was enveloped in darkness, the only light emanating from a solitary, sputtering candle set upon a stone pedestal in the center of the room. The walls were bare, save for a series of carved inscriptions that encircled the space, their lines and curves forming arcane patterns that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. I felt as though the very air in the room was charged with a tangible malevolence, a cold, suffocating sensation that clung to my skin like icy tendrils. Each breath I took was a struggle against the overwhelming pressure of despair that pressed in from all sides. I moved toward the pedestal with a mix of trepidation and a desperate need to understand. There, resting atop a heavy slab of stone, was a small, ornate box crafted of dark, weathered wood and bound in tarnished iron. The craftsmanship was exquisite, yet every detail of the box exuded a deep-seated sorrow and a latent threat. I hesitated for a moment before reaching out to open it, my hands trembling as if fearing the very act might unleash something unspeakable. Elliot's eyes were fixed on me, his presence a silent reassurance in that palpable moment of dread. As I slowly lifted the lid, the candle's flame danced wildly, casting erratic shadows that made the interior of the box seem to shift and change. Inside lay an assortment of objects, an old key with intricate engravings, a handful of brittle pages stained with the unmistakable red of old blood, and a small, withered figurine of a woman, her features carved in exquisite detail and her expression one of eternal mourning. I felt a profound sorrow in that figurine, as if it captured the very essence of suffering, and I could not help but imagine it as a representation of countless lives lost to the cruelty of fate and the weight of injustice. In that moment, a sudden, harsh gust of icy wind slammed the door shut behind us, plunging the chamber into near-total darkness save for the trembling candlelight. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I sensed the presence of something unseen moving among the shadows. A whispered voice, soft and mournful, brushed against my ear, too close to be coincidental. I spun around, almost dropping the box, my heart hammering in my chest. Elliot moved to stand beside me, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the encroaching darkness. "We're not alone," he murmured, his tone laced with both warning and a grim acceptance of the inevitable. The oppressive atmosphere in the chamber thickened as the fevered whispers began to coalesce into discernible words. I strained to hear through the cacophony of my own racing thoughts, and soon a voice emerged, quiet yet commanding, a voice layered with centuries of anguish. The words were incomprehensible at first, a mixture of archaic syllables that nonetheless carried a weight of sorrow and repudiation. With every utterance, I could feel the air shudder, the very walls of the chamber trembling as if they too were in pain. I fumbled for my notebook, determined to document every detail while my mind struggled to comprehend the intensity of what was unfolding. Elliot's steady hand on my shoulder grounded me as the relentless clamor of the invisible presence swelled around us. He took a measured breath and, in his calm but resolute voice, said, "We must record and observe. Whatever it is speaking to us, demanding that we bear witness." I scribbled furiously as the strange utterances wrapped around us like a shroud. In the dim light, I could almost see ethereal shapes swirling at the edges of my vision, spectral forms that dissolved when I tried to focus too closely. One figure, in particular, emerged, the woman draped in tattered garments, her face obscured by a cascade of dark hair. She drifted toward the pedestal, her eyes empty and pleading, moving as though drawn by a force beyond her control. I could feel my rational mind asunder, caught between the need to understand and the primal impulse to flee the oppressive energies that so palpably pressed in on all sides. In that charged moment, time seemed to stretch into an endless continuum of agony and revelation. Every tiny detail, the worn grooves on the key, the gritty texture of the blood-stained pages, the frozen, mournful stare of the figurine, seemed imbued with an irrevocable significance. I remembered the many nights back in Mexico as I pored over ancient texts by candlelight, seeking wisdom and clarity in the sworn shadows. Now, in Blackwood Manor, that same ancient wisdom reared up before me in a form both physical and spectral, a living manifestation of sorrow that defied explanation. As the apparition of the mourning woman hovered near the pedestal, I felt compelled to reach out to her, as if my touch could bridge the gulf that separated her spectral existence from my own fragile reality. But at that precise moment, a sudden eruption of force ripped through the chamber, a violent outburst that sent scattered shards of memory and fear spiraling through the air. The candle's flame sputtered violently before stabilizing, and in the cramped space of the secret chamber, every sound was magnified, the labored breath of a presence, the faint scrape of ethereal claws on stone, and the guttural, almost animalistic moaning that resonated from somewhere deep within the manor's hidden confines. Elliot and I exchanged a look of visceral terror, our eyes wide with a mingling of disbelief and sorrow. Without a word, we both recognized that we were witnessing an unfolding confrontation between forces that had long been at war, a clash of spectral energies that threatened to unmoor us from any semblance of sanity. I clutched my notebook to my chest as I inched backward, feeling the icy tendrils of an unseen hand brush against my skin, leaving a trail of numbing cold in its wake. Each heartbeat thundered in my ears as the oppressive darkness pressed in from all sides. Determination warring with trepidation, Elliot stepped forward, his voice breaking the stifling silence. "We must not let fear paralyze us," he insisted, his tone carrying the weight of resolve that I had come to rely on in the face of unspeakable terror. "Every detail we record here, every word whispered in the dark, is a part of the story of Blackwood Manor, a story of pain, sacrifice, and redemption." His words, though calm, reverberated with the gravity of our circumstances, urging us to bear witness to truths that were best left shrouded in shadow. As if in response to his proclamation, the spectral figure began to dissipate gradually, her form weakening as if tethered by unseen forces. The chamber fell into a momentary, disquieting calm that was both a reprieve and a precursor to further revelations. I sank to the stone floor, my legs trembling as I attempted to gather the torrent of emotions surging within me, a potent blend of sorrow, terror, and an almost feverish curiosity to press on. I could feel the manor's sorrow seep into my very being, each heartbeat a quiet tribute to the lives and tragedies interred within its walls. After a long, excruciating pause, Elliot approached the pedestal once more, his eyes fixed on the small ornate box we had discovered earlier. "There is something within these objects, a binding charm, perhaps, or a remnant of the ritual that was performed here," he said solemnly. His fingers, steady yet reverent, traced along the surface of the locket-like key and the fragile pages stained with symbolic red. With each touch, I noticed that the very air around us seemed to hum with latent energy, as though the manor itself acknowledged our intrusion into its secret heart. Compelled by a need to understand the ritualistic underpinnings of what we had witnessed, I carefully collected the scattered items from the box. I pressed the brittle pages together, studying the cryptic symbols that adorned them, a melding of Latin script, indigenous marks, and curved, haunting glyphs that defied immediate translation. The figurine, so delicate yet so powerful in its silent sorrow, seemed to be the nexus of these disparate tokens, binding them together in a communion of grief and defiance. I inhaled deeply, the stale, cold air filling my lungs as I committed every minuscule detail to memory, aware that the task of comprehending this tapestry of horror fell upon us alone. With our immediate confrontation receding into the background, Elliot suggested that we broaden our search. "There is much more to be learned from the depths of this manor," he remarked quietly, referring to corridors and levels yet to be explored. We left the secret chamber reluctantly, the memory of its oppressive ambience seared into our minds like a chilling brand. Our footsteps echoed with a determined urgency as we retraced our path back through the winding corridors of Blackwood Manor. Our next venture led us to the manor's lower levels, a descent into what appeared to be the forgotten basement, where the physical remnants of occult rituals and desperate ceremonies lay hidden. The narrow stairwell was damp and reeked of moss and mildew. Each step downward was accompanied by a deep, resonant creak, a mournful testament to the building's age and the suffering entombed within its foundation. As we reached the bottom, a corridor unfolded before us, its walls scarred with deep cuts and smeared markings that resembled hurried scratchings of an ancient language. The darkness was nearly absolute, punctuated only by the dim light of our lanterns, which cast elongated, wavering shadows that merged with the gloom. I led the way along the narrow passage, my senses acutely attuned to every subtle shift in the air. The corridor opened out into a vast, grim chamber that served as a repository for the manor's most clandestine records. Dust-laden shelves lined the walls, their surfaces burdened with brittle binders and yellowed manuscripts chronicling not only the lineage of Blackwood Manor but also the forbidden rites once practiced by its enigmatic inhabitants. Though I attempted to focus on the tangible details, the spidery fonts of handwritten records, the intricate patterns etched into the once polished surfaces, I found my mind repeatedly drawn to the intangible sense of sorrow that suffused the space. It was as if the very stone and paper we encountered carried the mournful sighs of a tortured past. As I leafed through a particularly fragile ledger, I discovered entries penned in a desperate scrawl, detailing gatherings that had taken place under the cover of darkness, when the boundary between the living and the dead was said to be at its most malleable. The descriptions hinted at rituals intended to seal away a malignant presence, a practice born out of fear and the realization that certain forces defied mortal control. My pulse quickened as I read, each sentence resonating with an urgency that transcended time. I looked up just as Elliot rejoined me, his expression somber yet resolute. "Look at this," he said, his voice a blend of fascination and despair. He pointed to a series of cryptic symbols that had been appended to the ledger's margins, symbols that matched those we had encountered earlier in the study and the secret chamber. I marveled at the frenetic intensity of those relics of the past, aware that they were not merely decorative marks but portals to an understanding of the dark ritual that had once been performed on these very grounds. The discovery only deepened the sense of foreboding as we pieced together the scattered fragments of this ancient narrative. Our conversation was suddenly interrupted by the reverberating sound of distant footsteps, a slow, deliberate measure that echoed as if heralding the return of that indescribable presence which had once roamed freely in the hidden rooms of the manor. The sound of shifting weight in the darkness made my skin prickle, and in unison, Elliot and I fell silent, straining our ears to decipher the source. It was then that an eerie, almost imperceptible glow began to emanate from behind a stack of dilapidated crates in one corner of the chamber. The soft luminescence was ghastly and unnatural, casting jagged shadows and illuminating a small alcove that had previously been swallowed by darkness. Drawn by an irresistible compulsion, I moved toward the source of the light. The closer I got, the more distinct the glow became, a spectral light that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. As I reached the alcove, I discovered a circular array of runes etched into the floor, their lines shimmering faintly. The runes were fresh, disturbingly so, as though they had been inscribed in a moment of frenzied urgency. Elliot's voice, resonant and soft, came from behind me. "These markings, they're a summoning circle." His observation sent a chill deep into my bones. The unmistakable signs of a ritual, a desperate attempt to control the unfathomable darkness that dwelled within these chambers, lay bare before us. I knelt and ran my fingers across the cool stone, feeling an almost magnetic pull, a silent beckoning toward the vortex of sorrow from which these markings had emerged. For what felt like an eternity, time itself seemed to fracture and slow. In that suspended moment, I became acutely aware of every sense, the cold dampness in the air, the haunting echoes of past lamentations mingling with the soft hum of the runes, and the quivering anticipation that gripped my heart. Elliot's calm, analytical tone broke the silence when he said, "We need to document this, to understand if this circle is linked to the ritual described in the ledger." I nodded, my hand already moving over my notebook as I scribbled down every detail, each rune, each unnatural curve, every sensation that coursed through me as I became witness to a lingering fragment of a ritual long past. We spent what felt like hours in that part of the basement, meticulously recording every finding and cross-referencing them with the scattered notes from earlier. The act of documentation was both cathartic and horrifying, a means by which we could anchor ourselves in the reality of what we were uncovering while bearing witness to the manor's sorrowful legacy. The deeper we delved, the more the boundaries between the tangible remnants of history and the spectral present began to blur. I felt as if I were walking on the precipice of a revelation so profound and terrible that it threatened to undo the very fabric of my sanity. Eventually, compelled by a desire to escape the suffocating gloom of the lower levels, Elliot suggested that we return back to the central hall to gather our thoughts and reassess our findings. With reluctant steps, we ascended the narrow, spiraling stairs that led us from the basement back into the cavernous expanses of Blackwood Manor. Each step upward felt like an emergence from a deep, inescapable despair, yet the burdens of the horrors we had witnessed clung to us like spectral chains. Once again, the estate greeted us with its eerie blend of imposing grandeur and pervasive sorrow. The sound of our footsteps in the long, echoing corridors was now accompanied by a spectral silence that felt laden with expectancy, as though the manor itself were holding its breath in anticipation of our next move. Elliot and I resumed our exploration with a sense of urgency born not only from our need to document every nuance of this cursed place but also from the overwhelming realization that Blackwood Manor was not a passive repository of tragic history, it was an active participant in the unfolding of these dark rites. It was during this renewed circumnavigation of the upper levels that I found myself drawn once more to a narrow, spiraling staircase that led into what appeared to be the manor's attic. Though the staircase was typically shunned by day and cloaked in rumors of malevolence, tonight it beckoned with an irresistible allure. I led the way, each step creaking underfoot like the poignant toll of a bell summoning the dead. The air grew colder still, and as we reached the summit, I became aware of an almost tangible sorrow that permeated the confined space. The attic was a chaotic tangle of antiquated furniture, moth-eaten drapes, and countless forgotten memorabilia, a veritable mausoleum of discarded dreams and unspeakable regrets. Half hidden among the piles, I discovered a battered trunk, its brass fittings tarnished and its lid scarred by deep gouges. I hesitated only a moment before Elliot signaled for me to open it. Inside, I found a series of meticulously kept journals penned by one of the manor's earlier residents, a recluse whose fragile life had intersected with the dark ceremonies taking place on these grounds. The journals, filled with feverish lines and desperate confessions, detailed secret meetings, whisperings of an ancient covenant, and pleas for mercy to forces that transcended mortal ken. I read them with trembling intensity, the weight of each word a reminder of the agony that had plagued this place. Outside the attic window, the moon had ascended high into a cloud-strewn sky, bathing the manor in a pale, ghostly glow. The light accentuated the scars in the crumbling masonry and cast elongated shadows over the fragile remnants of a once proud edifice. I sat there for what seemed both an eternity and a solitary instant, my thoughts swirling with the voices of those long past. Each diary entry, each carefully inscribed detail, wove together a tapestry of sorrow and defiance, a narrative that defied easy explanation yet demanded acknowledgement. As I closed the trunk with a heavy heart, Elliot approached silently, his eyes reflecting the same profound mixture of grief, determination, and unyielding curiosity that had driven us from the very start. In that charged silence, we understood without words that our exploration had unearthed something monumental, a truth too layered and painful to be undone. The attic, with its dusty relics and ghostly intimations, had become a microcosm of Blackwood Manor itself, fragmented, troubled, and forever haunted by the specters of an irretrievable past. Finally, aware that the night was deepening further and that exhaustion threatened to overwhelm us, we descended from the attic and made our way back to a small sitting room that had once served as a quiet refuge for the manor's inhabitants. With each step along the creaking floorboards, I felt as if I were carrying both the memories of the dead and an indelible impression of sorrow, a sorrow that had seeped into the very core of my being. In that intimate space, the candlelight danced across the faded upholstery and scuffed surfaces, echoing the transient nature of hope amidst a relentless tide of despair. I took a seat in one of the time-worn armchairs, feeling both the physical weariness of the journey and the weight of each revelation etched into my mind. Elliot joined me, and for a long, silent while, we simply acknowledged the gravity of what we had witnessed. The living silence was punctuated only by the distant murmur of the manor's ancient heartbeat, a pulse that reminded us that Blackwood Manor was not merely a relic of the past, but a living testament to the agony and torment that resounded through every stone and every sigh of its whispered legends. In that moment, as the night deepened and the manor's spectral symphony continued unabated, I resolved to record every detail with unwavering fidelity. Each scribbled note in my notebook, each fragment of overheard dialogue, and every sensation, whether it was the icy caress of a stray ghostly presence or the quiet lament of a forgotten soul, would be preserved as a testament to the horrors and mysteries we were forced to confront. The darkness around us felt omnipresent, as if it were a living, breathing entity determined to claim its due in our draining struggle against the oppressive veil of hopelessness. The hours stretched interminably as we remained locked in our determined quest for understanding. At times, I felt completely overwhelmed by the convergence of spectral presences, the layered memories etched into the very walls of Blackwood Manor, and the unyielding sorrow that seemed to emanate from every corner of this desolate haven. Yet in those moments of all-consuming dread, there was also a spark, a fleeting yet undeniable glimmer of purpose that urged us to push forward, to uncover the truth that lay hidden in the ruins of the past. I continued to document everything in meticulous detail on that long night, my handwriting never wavering even as my inner resolve was tested by moments of inexplicable terror. Each step taken, each artifact uncovered, and each ghostly whisper that caressed the edge of my consciousness gradually wove together a narrative as dense and intricate as the shadows that danced across the floors of Blackwood Manor. And though fear gripped my heart with icy hands at times, I would not, abandon our pursuit of truth, even if it meant facing the darkest recesses of both history and the supernatural in a relentless struggle against the forces that conspired to keep the manor's secrets shrouded in eternal night. In the quiet aftermath of our descent from the attic and basement, I found solace only in the steady, measured cadence of Elliot's voice as he recounted each detail in a low, reflective tone. There, amidst the flickering candlelight and the palpable quiet of a manor that seemed to be stirring from its long, troubled slumber, I vowed to bear witness to every sorrowful murmur and every disembodied sigh. I set pen to paper, determined that no matter how unfathomable the darkness became, our shared chronicle of Blackwood Manor would endure as a testament to those tormented souls who had suffered in silence. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of the manor's despair and the intensity of the night wash over me, a mingling of terror and profound empathy that left an indelible mark on my spirit. In that intimate communion with the past, I transcended the limits of time, caught between moments of unspeakable horror and the fragile hope that the truth, however painful, might someday bring solace to the restless dead. And in that transient, whispered promise, I discovered the strength to cling to both the present and the memory of what had been a tribute to every lost and tortured soul that had ever wandered through these haunted halls. Thus, as the oppressive darkness of Blackwood Manor deepened into the unyielding silence of the pre-dawn hours, Elliot and I sat together amidst the relics of sorrow and the fragmented echoes of a tragic legacy. The manor's secrets, slowly but inexorably, revealed themselves in layers of grief and spectral warning, and I knew that every detail documented on that fateful night would serve as both a chronicle and a memorial to the souls forever bound to this cursed place. Every tremor in my heart, every whispered recollection of a face unseen, joined together in a silent litany that promised our words and our struggles would never be forgotten. In that hallowed quiet, as the first light of dawn struggled against the lingering darkness, our eyes met in solemn understanding. There, within the silent communion of two souls united by both duty and desperation, we braced ourselves for the coming hours in Blackwood Manor, a relentless descent beneath the veil of darkness, where every truth revealed was as painful as it was profound, and every step forward was guided by the unwavering resolve to unearth the secrets of an enduring nightmare. The pre-dawn hush that had blanketed Blackwood Manor in a suffocating silence gave way, very gradually, to the first chilled whispers of morning. Yet even as the pallid rays of early light seeped into the corridors, there was no reprieve from the oppressive sorrow that had come to define this accursed place. I remained awake in the guest quarters with Elliot, both of us gathered around a time-worn wooden table cluttered with our notebooks, brittle pages, and the fragmented relics of our journey into the manor's past. My hand still trembled as I recalled the spectral presence in the secret chamber, the forlorn woman whose eyes had pleaded silently for release, and those runes that scrawled an urgent command too ancient to fully interpret. Elliot's steady gaze met mine as he finally broke the heavy silence. "It's time," he said in a voice that seemed to carry both the inevitability of fate and the last vestige of hope. In that moment, I knew that our next steps would determine whether the relentless sorrow of Blackwood Manor would be exorcised at last or if its malignant curse would claim us in the end. Without hesitating, we gathered our scattered findings, the ornate box, the key inscribed with intricate symbols, the fragile, blood-stained pages, and the mournful figurine, and set off into the manor's ever-deepening gloom. We ascended from the guest quarters into the grand central hall, an expansive space that bore the weight of centuries in its every crack and crevice. The chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling swayed slightly, casting fractious patterns of light and shadow over the ancient stone walls. Every step on the flagstone floor resounded like a call to the past. The air was thick with the residue of long-forgotten lamentations, and I could almost hear voices, soft, sorrowful whispers that collided with the wind and the creaking of the old manor. I clutched my notebook close, forcing my mind to focus on the present, even as images from the hidden chambers flooded my thoughts. At the center of the hall, before a hulking fireplace that dominated one end of the room, stood an altar of sorts, a rough-hewn platform made of dark stone veined with streaks of rust, over which ancient symbols had been carved. It was here, Elliot explained in a low and measured tone, where the original ritual must have been performed. He unrolled a faded scrap of paper onto the altar, aligning it with the symbols etched into the stone. "Every artifact we've recovered points to this place," he said, his eyes intensifying with a mixture of determination and dread. "The inscriptions on the key, the runes in the cellar, even the blood on these pages, they are all connected. It's as if someone intended to bind a power here, or perhaps keep it imprisoned." His words sent a shiver down my spine, for the connection between ancient sorcery and the ensuing supernatural plague became ever more undeniable with each passing moment. Carefully, we arranged the relics around the perimeter of the altar. The brittle pages formed a circle like a sacrificial script, while the miniature figurine of a mourning woman was placed at the exact center. I watched as Elliot produced a small, silver hand mirror from his coat, a tool he sometimes used to reflect or redirect energies of the unnatural. The object glinted in the low light as he positioned it atop the figurine, aligning its reflective surface with some implicit, inexplicable axis of power. As we finished the arrangement, a charged stillness descended upon the hall. The shadows seemed to pull closer together, and the faint sound of a heartbeat that was neither entirely human nor mechanical, echoed in the corners of the ancient space. I could feel the manor itself beginning to breathe, as though the very stones exhaled centuries of despair and wrath in unison. My mind raced with images of the coven rituals, the desperate pacts forged in fear, and the souls condemned to wander these cursed corridors, seeking solace or vengeance. Then, suddenly, the temperature plummeted. A biting coldness seeped in from unseen crevices, and the patterned light from the chandelier quivered, fractured by the sudden intrusion of a spectral force. I saw, for the briefest of moments, a shimmering figure at the far end of the hall, a woman in tattered garments whose face was stricken with both grief and fury. She stood motionless beneath a gargoyle that clutched at the stone ceiling, her form half concealed by darkness and half illuminated by a cruel, silver radiance. My heart hammered in my chest. This apparition, as horrifying as it was enigmatic, was no longer a mere echo but had assumed a corporeal presence among us. Elliot's voice cut through the oppressive silence, calm yet resolute. "Stand back, "Miguel," he commanded, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his own escalating anxiety. "We need to complete the counter-ritual." He unrolled a scrap of paper, a second set of instructions or perhaps a plea written in desperate haste, and began to chant in low, measured tones. The words were archaic, their syllables resonating as if summoned from some primordial void. I watched, transfixed, as his gaze moved back and forth between the relics and the spectral figure, his countenance illuminated by flashes of determination intermingled with an undercurrent of sorrow. I moved nearer to the altar, drawn by an unspoken need to bear witness to this final confrontation. The spectre of the morning woman slowly drifted forward, her dark eyes fixed upon the mirror that lay at the heart of our arrangement. I felt a cold hand of dread seize my heart as I recognized in her expression a profound message, one that spoke of centuries of anguish, of lives squandered and wronged under the weight of oppressive injustice. The house sighed, a low, resonant sound that seemed to emanate from deep within its foundation, and the murmurs of long-dead voices rose in a discordant crescendo. Outside, the wind had gathered strength, groaning and howling as if echoing the wrath of betrayed souls. Every window in the hall fluttered in its grip, the sheer force of it causing loose fragments of plaster to tremble. I could feel a presence, not entirely malevolent but desperate, swirling around us. It was as though 100 sorrowful souls had converged upon this altar, each seeking liberation from their eternal torment. In that moment, the room transformed into an arena where the past and the present collided in a tumultuous display of raw, unbridled emotion. Elliot's chanting grew louder, more forceful. He began to pace in a deliberate circle around the altar, his hands raised to the heavens as if to summon or command the spectral energies. With every step, the temperature in the hall seemed to dip further, the shadows drawing ever nearer until they threatened to engulf us entirely. I gripped my notebook so tightly that my fingers went numb, scanning every nuance of this surreal battle between sorrow and defiance. The chants mingled with the soft, almost inaudible cries of the unseen multitude, and I could not tell where the voices ended and ours began. Then, as if at the climax of some ancient, cosmic countdown, the spectre moved to the very center of the circle. Her form expanded, becoming more distinct and, paradoxically, more insubstantial. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, a moment charged with such profound sorrow and unyielding resolve that it seemed to quench the very flame of hope within me. I felt her silent plea, her desperate union of grief and forgiveness, and in that instance, I sensed that the decades of hatred and pain were culminating in a final, cathartic release. Elliot's voice lowered into a deep, resonant tone as he intoned the final words of the counter-ritual. The air around the altar pulsed violently, the relics vibrating with an energy so intense that even the stone beneath our feet seemed to shudder. Time itself appeared to slow, each heartbeat a measured echo in the charged stillness. As his words reached a crescendo, I saw a sudden, blinding flash of white light erupt from the mirror. It surged outward in a wave of brilliance that momentarily banished every shadow, every fear, from the room. For several agonizing seconds, I stared, awestruck, as the very fabric of the manor's darkness was torn asunder by that radiant burst. The spectre's form shimmered, her anguished features softening as if relieved from a perpetual burden. In that incandescent moment, terror and despair were replaced by a fragile hope, a promise that the centuries of pain were yielding to an absolution long denied. The white light, like an indomitable force of cleansing fire, bathed every stone, every scrap of memory, with an almost divine luminance. Elliot halted his chanting abruptly, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and quiet triumph. "It's working," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the roar of the dissipating energy. The relentless cascade of light began to recede slowly, like the tide withdrawing from a tormented shore. In its wake, the hall revealed a transformed visage, The oppressive gloom had been lifted, replaced by an ethereal serenity that spoke of hard-won redemption and a final, bittersweet farewell to suffering. As I regained my composure, I could see that the relics placed around the altar no longer pulsed with malignant energy. Instead, they lay dormant, as if their purpose had been finally fulfilled. The once fierce chill in the air waned, replaced by a tentative warmth that hinted at the restoration of equilibrium. I stepped forward slowly, approaching the altar where the spectral woman had stood. There, in the stillness that followed the tumultuous climax, her figure was now reduced to a gentle wisp of light, barely perceptible, yet undeniably present, drifting upward toward the fractured ceiling like a released soul ascending to rest. I could feel Elliot's presence as he joined me by the altar, his eyes reflective and soft with a sorrow that had finally found its quiet end. "The curse, it's been broken," he declared softly, as though sharing a sacred secret. In that instant, every grueling moment of our investigation, every restless night spent combing through dusty records and forbidden texts, coalesced into this singular, transcendental chapter, one where the morrow promised the cessation of the manor's relentless torment. Outside, the storm of night that had raged like a furious tempest for so long now waned to a gentle drizzle. The wind had quieted, and the once tumultuous skies, streaked with the bruise of twilight, began to yield to the first coherent blush of dawn. I ventured to one of the tall, broken windows and peered out. The world outside, though scarred by time and nature's inevitable decay, had taken on a strange new vibrancy. The trees swayed with languid grace, their leaves dripping with the promise of renewal, and the distant hills glowed in a soft, forgiving light. Inside the hall, the residual glow of the counter-ritual lingered like a benediction upon every surface. My heart was still pounding in my ears, the echoes of despair now replaced by a resonant, inward calm that felt as though it had been born out of the deepest chasms of human suffering. I traced the contours of the altar with a trembling hand, feeling the rough, cold stone beneath my fingertips while my mind assiduously committed every detail to memory. Elliot and I, though forever changed by the night's events, stood in silent communion as the final vestiges of supernatural fury dissipated. The manor, once a bleak monument to long-held atrocities and unyielding darkness, now whispered a softer hymn, a hymn of release, of reconciliation between the living and the lost. In that cinematic moment, the stark beauty of redemption radiated from every fractured corner of Blackwood Manor, echoing with the sigh of centuries let go. As I slowly began to gather our notes and relics, each artifact imbued now not only with a tale of sorrow but also with a message of absolution, a single chapter of our lives drew to a close. The manor's corridors, once treacherous passages of unbridled torment, transformed under the tender light of a new dawn. Every shadow, every lingering spectre, seemed at peace with the finality of the act that had set them free. I stepped out into the cool air of the morning, Elliot close behind me. The grand entrance of Blackwood Manor now revealed itself in a different light, where the once malevolent facade had softened into the dignified lines of a forgotten relic yearning for the embrace of time. The heavy door creaked open, and the crisp air of the outside world, a world that had been waiting in hushed anticipation, welcomed us like a long-lost friend. In that opening moment, as we walked slowly away from the manor's threshold, every haunting cry of the past was, for the first time in 100 years, stilled by the unyielding power of redemption. In the quiet that followed, I found myself musing on the nature of our journey, a journey that had thrust us into the heart of pain, madness, and ultimately, hope. The relics of Blackwood Manor, the anguished voices, and the cold, oppressive dread were all part of a tapestry too intricate to fully unravel. Yet in that final, cathartic surge of light, I recognized the great irony that the very darkness we had battled was not annihilated by force, but transformed through understanding, sorrow, and the resolute act of healing a centuries-old wound. And so, with each measured step away from the mansion, the scene before us grew increasingly cinematic in its quiet majesty. The ancient estate receded into the mist, its outline softened by the gentle caress of sunrise, as if it too had come to accept the bittersweet truth of its existence. The horizon was ablaze with hues of rose, lavender, and gold, a final testament that even the deepest curses can be unbound by the power of human resolve and compassionate insight. I paused at the edge of the property, looking back one last time toward the looming silhouette of Blackwood Manor. The structure stood there, not as a fortress of eternal misery, but as a monument to the convergence of past and present, a final, somber witness to the struggles and the ultimate release of tormented souls. In that fleeting, cinematic moment, all the sorrow, all the collected echoes of despair, seemed to dissolve into the gentle promise of a new day. I felt a tear trace a quiet path down my cheek, a silent benediction for the countless lives that had suffered here. Elliot's hand rested gently on my shoulder as he spoke in a tone fragile yet imbued with a hard-won serenity. "We have witnessed the unbinding, Miguel. Our duty was not in igniting more fires of vengeance, but in dousing them with the water of truth and forgiveness." His words resonated deeply within me as I considered the blurred lines between light and dark, the relentless accumulation of grief, and the transformative power of understanding. The morning light grew stronger, washing over the manor and the ruined grounds, etching every detail in the stark clarity of daybreak. As we turned to leave, the echoes of our footsteps mingled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of a mourning dove. In that final, resplendent moment at the threshold of Blackwood Manor, the chapter of relentless torment closed with an almost divine punctuation, a moment that was at once tragic, transcendent, and beautifully cinematic. With the manor fading into the luminescent embrace of a new dawn, I took in a deep, steadying breath. I knew that the memories of this night would forever be etched in my soul, even as the external darkness receded into legend. The journey we had embarked on, the confrontation with centuries of unbound sorrow, and the moment of cathartic redemption had all woven themselves into a single tapestry, one that would serve to remind the world that even the most potent curses are ultimately subject to the healing forces of compassion and truth. As Elliot and I walked side by side from the once haunted estate, our shadows merged with the rising sun on the dew-kissed grass, and the silence spoke volumes of the pain, the courage, and the triumph that had defined our path through those cursed halls. In the luminescent grace of that final scene, a scene both raw and resolute, I felt that the legacy of Blackwood Manor had been rewritten. Its sorrow was no longer a captive wail but a quiet, enduring testament to the enduring nature of hope and forgiveness. And so, as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky with brilliant strokes of color over the recovering landscape, our footsteps faded into the dawn. The manor's once oppressive facade now basked in the gentle light of morning, a silent, noble witness to a night of unspeakable horror transformed by an even more profound message, that from the darkest curses may rise a luminous peace, a peace that, in its own cinematic finality, promises that even the most haunted souls will eventually find their path to absolution. Thank you for joining us on this haunting journey through the possession of Blackwood Manor. We hope the eerie whispers and tragic echoes of this story resonated with you as much as they did with us. If you enjoyed this immersive experience, please remember to like this video, share it with fellow lovers of the mysterious, and subscribe to Bookbound Audio for more unforgettable narratives. Stay tuned for our next story, where we continue to explore the realms of history, mystery, and the unknown. Until then, keep your curiosity alive and your imagination wild. Happy listening!